Hello. Right, I'm live. It's on the screen, so I can only assume I am. Bear with me while I shuffle some things around, because, as you know, if this was anything less than a car crash, it wouldn't be keeping it simple, would it? So that's on there, and hopefully things are working. But you never know. You never know at all. It says on there upcoming, so something's not happening. And I shall type on here. Hello. Why isn't that working on there? It's very little sense to me, because this is the one that was scheduled and it says it should be working. So let's see. I've clicked on it now, so it's working. So I wonder who's there. It says there's one, which is possibly me. You never know. These things are a little bit like that. Just play with my little microphone. Hello, Kelvin. How you doing, mate? Nice to see you. I managed to be in the right place at the right time this time. It's got to be an advantage, I guess. Let me see if I do that. So how's things for you, Kelvin? I'm playing with my microphone again. Thawing out from under a train. Now that's an interesting statement. That is not. That was not something I was expecting to have come up. What was that? Failed suicide attempt or a job? Funnily enough, my daughter's boyfriend had to. Train technician, right? Okay, that's sort of slightly better, because my daughter's boyfriend was going home the other night, night before last, and they'd planned for him to get the last train from our local town to Milton Keynes, and that was fine, except for the fact that somebody threw themselves onto the track after our station, so his train was there, but it wasn't going anywhere. He had to stay the night. Well, that's the way it worked out anyway. But yeah, it's fun. The technicians haven't been on strike. Well, that's good, because that's a safety thing. Although I do think that everybody who, just being a little bit political now, everybody who has been doing the industrial action has got just cause, possibly. Whether or not there's anything that can come out of it, that's another story. But yeah, I think they've got just cause. I worked for a company for 21 and a half years, and it took us nearly a year to get a strike thing through, and then they sort of then they got overtaken by various things, and it didn't actually happen. I think it was COVID was the biggest problem. But yeah, hadn't had a strike in 21 years, and things were getting bad. So they did actually have one. It was about, I don't know, 4 months ago, just before Christmas. Anyway, right, okay. I thought I'd talk about something today, but I found the script from last week. If anybody saw last week or has seen the replays from last week, you'll know I lost the script. Yes, funnily enough, I saw a bus that hit a lady once, and yeah, I saw a bus that hit a lady once, and it was quite interesting seeing what the police did with it afterwards. Where they were, I was driving down the road and I saw this policeman driving a bus, stamping on the brakes to see how far it would skid and that sort of thing. On a happy note, the driver was cleared, and it was all good in the end. But yeah, they took that bus away for must have been 6 months it was off the road whilst they were investigating it. Okay, fine. Let's move on. Right, I've been watching. I've got a really sad life. I just keep reading the Facebook groups, and the first thing that came to me yesterday or day before was somebody asking about record levels and things, and that was okay. And then somebody asking about erasing tapes and things. So, and then somebody else was asking about how abrasive tapes are and all this sort of stuff. So there's obviously a lack of knowledge out there. I thought I might as well talk about that. The script I had for last week, I should just tell you. It was recording levels, bias, 3-head decks, just in recording levels, record playing, and recordings from CDs and various other things, electronic drums, major music styles, including jazz and rock and roll. Oh, love a bit of rock and roll. And power supplies for international use. Oh, that's right. Capacitors and electronic components, erasing tapes, people who know very little about a subject but pretend they know all there is to know. Now, this is not looking at me. I know virtually nothing about anything. But the next line says a lack of research. What I do is I research it before I talk about it, or at least I try to. And a fresh look at whatever anybody wants to come up with. So, unless anybody else has got anything to say, I shall start on a monologue, because that's what these things tend to be. And picture's okay. I'm actually doing a video on one of the subjects, which is going to go up tonight. It's nearly finished, and it's got guest starring Norman Wisdom and Bruce Forsyth, although they don't know it because they're dead. But they were very, very good. Anybody who's on the international market, Bruce Forsyth was a very good song and dance man, general entertainer, and game show host. And Norman Wisdom was an excellent comedy part player. But he was a star, not just exactly Calvin. He rocked. He was well known for doing several sort of things. The Milkman, and but anyway, he made loads and loads of films and stuff. But yeah, I'm not going to give you any spoilers as to what they're in, but they're illustrating a point on my latest video, so that may be of interest. But it's at the end, so you'll have to watch all the way through or skip forward to find that bit. And I will credit where I got the clip from as well, so I must make sure I remember to do that. And yeah, that's one. Right. I wonder if Wasim's coming today. He's been here for the last 3 weeks, or Michelle. So yeah, that'd be nice. If they're not, then I'll say hi, and you can watch it on the rerun. So anyway, right. What I was going to say was, people seem to be confused by recording levels, and I don't understand why they're confused by recording levels. Westlife did a video last week on the Technics and the fact that some of them are falling apart, which is true because they've used plastic and the plastic's degrading. And this one had auto level control for the recordings, so it was obviously entry level, and I wouldn't have been happy with it. And but as I say, I was looking on Facebook and people were asking about record levels and things, and I don't understand why there is a confusion. Maybe you can put something in the comments, anybody who watches this, and explain to me why, when you've got a meter, which is red and green or whatever, always red anyway, at around about 0, and it goes up to maybe +10 or +6, depends on the deck. Why would you think that bashing the meter into the red is a good idea? I've got a car and it's got a tachometer, and at around about 6,000 RPM, the tachometer goes red. And I think it's about 6,500 RPM, the limiter comes in. You can't go more than that. So if you've gone more than that, what's happened is you're going down a hill and you've changed in the wrong gear. Why would anybody think that bashing it into the red's a good idea? Now, I understand that there's a problem with things being quiet and then being loud, but I don't understand why people are confused by the fact that you should not bang it into the red. Anyway, like I say, if you've got any answers to that, put it in the comments below. That'd be useful. And the other thing was bias on record decks. Record deck. Is it important, and do we need to be able to adjust it? Yes, the recording bias. Now, Calvin and I have had a discussion about this at various points, and somebody else put a comment on about bias as well. I think Jason mentioned it as well. And yeah, it's one of those things that seems to cause. There is a. I'm going to say it. There is a mystique and a magic about cassette recording and tape recording, and people who don't know how it works, they get sort of lost into the mystique of it. I did an illustration the other day about a friend of mine who was an engineer, and he carried on being an engineer. He had a black and white telly, and it flickered, and he thought that it was a color set trying to get out. He understood that he was wrong, but he was fooled by it initially. And it's this thing about people have ideas that are wrong, and they believe them because they don't know any different. The thing about the bias is, in essence, it's either right or wrong. The bias is set right, and the tape is made to work on that bias. And people will then comment and say, well, that's not strictly speaking true, because different tapes bias up different when you've got a cassette deck with the ability to alter the bias. This is where research comes in. The original tapes were made to a standard setting. What then happened was they wanted to try and make them slightly better, and manufacturers started fiddling with the compounds and things, and the result of that was that they wanted to try and drift it. So they actually moved the specifications slightly, and so they got various issues of specifications. And the only way you could get a cassette deck or any other deck to get the best out of a tape was to allow it to have a little bit of flexibility. But the knobs on the front, and this is where I'm talking about, not the presets inside, the knobs on the front only move it a few percent. I wouldn't put a figure on it because it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, but it only moves it a little bit, which is why you need to know how a tape's going to work on your machine. Because if your machine is set up correctly and you've got no adjustment, and you have it set at, and we'll say it's at minus the maximum tolerance, and then you get a tape that is plus the maximum tolerance, the gap between the minus and the plus. So there's specification, and so one's at minus and the other one's at plus, so the gap there is quite big. That isn't what normally happens, but that can be what happens. So if you've got an adjuster on the front, you can twiddle your tape in, your machine in to match the tape a little bit better, and that's basically what it comes down to. Exactly, Kelvin. The tapes often outperform the decks, hence, well, that's why you got decks that got better, because there was the ability to do so. So yeah, the point I was trying to make was that bias on cassette decks isn't likely to be very far out, but it's well worth, when you find a brand of tape or a type of tape that works well in your deck, stick with it. But, and here is a general rule, and I'm sure Kelvin will agree with this, but you're quite entitled to argue if you want, Kelvin. If you stick with a proper brand, one of the mainstream brands, TDK, BASF, Maxell, the chances of it being very far out, if your deck is set correctly, is not particularly likely. It may be that you won't get quite the highs that you might have otherwise got, but can you hear them anyway? Or it might be that the bass is ever so slightly lacking, but could you have heard that anyway? But we're talking minuscule percents here, and this is like trying to tune a Ferrari or a Formula One car. If a Formula One car is slightly out, it loses a lot of power. If a Mini is out when you're tuning up a Mini, it loses a tad, a little bit, a minuscule amount of power because it didn't have much to start with. But the point being, if you fine tune something and it's a high performance thing, then little bits make a big difference. But if you're talking about normal stuff, then actually a little bit won't make much difference. In fact, sometimes it can be preferable. And that's where some of the people on the forums, they make their points about, I use this tape, it gives a slightly better bass response. I use this tape, it gives a slightly better treble response. But actually, it's not a great deal. It's not a deal breaker anyway. Let me see, what else do I have? Cassette, 3-head cassette decks. There seems to be a lot of people who don't understand why you'd want to have a 3-head cassette deck. And I must admit, for me, because my hearing now stops at about 11K, there's very little point in having a 3-head cassette deck. And this is where, thank you, Kelvin. I'm glad about that. You could have argued, but I'm glad you agree. So the research paid off. Yeah, 3-head cassette deck. Now, I know a lot of people drool after 3-head cassette decks, and I'm not going to say anything bad about 3-head cassette decks. What I am going to say, though, is that they are probably some of the things that people push about them isn't a good idea, because they say things like you can adjust the recording whilst you're going along. Well, if you've got the best album ever and you're trying to record it, why would you start playing it and halfway through alter something so that the second half is better than the first half? Surely you're better off setting it up right in the first place. So that's where suddenly that gain has been lost. Now, where the 3 heads really do win, and I'm sure people will agree with this, and some people will argue, in which case, please put stuff in the comments. I need comments. YouTube like comments. They don't like people to get everything out of the video. They like people to have a bit of interaction. So anyway, what you get with a 3-head deck is you get a record head and a playback head. The record head has got a slightly narrower gap, I believe it is, and the playback head's got a slightly wider gap. It could be the other way around. Comments down below. But anyway, the difference is the actual width of the gap, which means that in order to have a single head to do record and playback, they compromise, and you get a fractionally not so good playback and a fractionally not so good recording. But there are some excellent 2-head decks that do really good recordings. Now, Lost Kelvin said there, the obsession of the w-1200 was a game changer for the beginner and would be more than adequate for a working machine. Absolutely agree with you. And that's why, just changing to what Kelvin said there, the reason that I used the 1200 for all my cassette tests is because I want people to know whether or not it's any good on the tapes that they're likely to have. And yeah, it's more than adequate. And actually, you give it a nice tape, it sounds pretty damn good. Even Westlice's got one and he likes it. And if you've listened to the new tapes that I've used on there, you listen to the buff ting on one of my tests, and you can hear that it can actually do a good job. One day I'll tell you why the buff ting is important. But if you've any ideas why the buff ting is important, put it in the comments below or on any of the other videos that I've got. Tell me why the buff ting is important, because that file that I use, I manufacture myself, because I wanted to have an all-in-one method of testing these things, and I'm pretty impressed with the way it works, actually. there were 3 versions. It grew slightly, but it's my equivalent of a test card, and it does a good job by and large. If you can think of any improvements, please put it in the comments below. I'm going to sound like a parrot. Pretty Polly. Put it in the comments below. If you don't like the sounding like a parrot, put it in the comments below, and go from there. Yeah. Why would you adjust it whilst recording? And you can do that on a 2-head machine. So what I always do, and to any newbies who's thought about doing recordings, set the thing up, record a bit. Fine. If you know the record or the track you're going to record, make sure that you've gone to the bit that's dynamic and that's going to be, doing something, and record that as your test part, and then the rest of the album has to fall in, unless you know that there's a problem with that, in which case you can turn the rest up when you get, or turn it down when you get to the loud bit. Right. Now, actually, talking about the W-1200, do you realise it's one of the few dual-well decks that actually records on both decks independently? As in, you can record on one, or you can record on the other, or you can send one to the other. You can't do 2 at the same time, but you can record on either deck. It's not just one deck that's for recording and one deck's for playing back. And it's got a karaoke function, which they've not pushed in the UK, but you plug a mic in and you can mix the mic in, which I thought was quite good, actually. Right, let's see. Just see what I was about it. Right, okay. Record playing, static record preamp. Any good? Oh yeah. Now that reminds me. Back in the day, I used to do a lot of record player repairs and various things, and there seems to be a everybody now buys record players with built-in preamps, which is fine. Which means they've got the feed straight out at the line level. If you've got the ability, and it's not everybody has, but if you've got the ability to switch it out and feed it into your, if you've got a vintage amp or a good quality amp like the Yamaha that I did a review on, it may well be worth overriding or disconnecting the preamp, the phono amp, or phono amp as it seems to have been called nowadays. This phono amp, it actually may not be the best bit of the turntable. I've got one of those, the Akai, no, Iowa, one of the cheap things, and it came with a built-in amp because it was with a fairly, well, it wasn't entry level, but it was a fairly low level cassette MIDI hi-fi thing, and it sounds very nice. It's okay, but I've got a very good Rotel AV amp, and when I got the thing running into it on line level, my daughter bought a record, and this is one she'd been talking about at college apparently, and so she bought this record and we put it on, and she was very impressed. It sounded very nice. 25 quid's worth of record, and that was fine. But I thought, well, I shall wonder if taking out this preamp is of any value. So, because I was thinking it was just something was just not quite right about the sound. It was one of those things where you can't put your finger on it. It sounded okay, but it didn't sound wonderful. And if there's one thing I do know, vinyl sounds wonderful because everybody says so. So what I then did was I got the took the bottom off, and I took out, literally, as in wired out, the phono amp, and that was great because I then plugged it in and switched it on, and wow, the difference was the difference between okay and wow. Now, I am not an audiophile. I like nice music. I like nice sounds. I like good equipment. But I can't do all these things with monster cables at $200 and all this sort of rubbish that people go around and buying fuses that are audiophile fuses. How does that work? Anyway, but I do know a good sound when I hear it, and I can hear the difference between a good sound and a better sound, if you like. And when I played this relatively cheap turntable with it's got a Audio-Technica ATL 3600, so it's a reasonable pickup. When I played that back on this record, and I had taken out the phono preamp and plugged it straight into the Rotel, it was a wow moment. And I thought, this is the sort of thing people talk about, which I hadn't heard of before. So then, as a point of interest, I tried instead of, because I don't like ruining things, I didn't want to completely take out the phono amp, but I did actually disconnect it completely. I didn't even use it as a terminal post in the end, because that altered the sound. But the actual output now is absolutely wonderful. So if you're playing a modern turntable with the preamp already built in, it might be worth you, if you've got the ability, switching it out or disconnecting it and trying it into a proper phono preamp, a good quality one. Because if you've got a record player that's cost you 50 quid, well, 70 quid or whatever they cost now for entry level thing, and you've got a phono preamp in it and a cartridge and all the rest of the bits, how does the money work out? It can't do, really. Something's got to give, and I guess the phono preamp is one of the things that can give. So it's well worth trying to switch it out and see how you go from there. Anyway, that's enough of that. Behringer do a very nice digitalizing phono preamp. You can switch it one way and you can use it as a normal digitalizer, switch it the other way, and you can use it for a phono preamp and digitalizer. And the reviews I've read have been very good. It's very similar to the 2222 that I've done a review on, but it's got the phono RIAA conversation in it. Anyway, that's that one. Let me see. Recording from CD. Yeah, do you realise it's hard to record from a CD? For the simple reason that a CD's got a 96 dB signal noise ratio. And if you don't know what that is, that means it goes loud. In fact, it's so loud that it'll make your ears bleed. Now, electronic drums. Do we want to talk about electronic drums? No, I don't suppose we do. If you do, I've got a set upstairs at some point. Power supplies. Yeah, let's have a look. Power supplies for international use. Yes, this is something that often comes up on the groups, but for some reason my video on it doesn't seem to be... well, it's been watched and it's been liked and it's got a really good click-through rate, but not many people have watched it. So I don't understand that. I mean, it's got one of the highest click-through percentages on my channel. It's got good information in there, and obviously anybody who's got any queries, if they put... I'm going to say this again. If anybody's got any queries on any of my videos, put a question in the comments and I will get back to you and I'll give you a proper answer, a personalized answer. And I can't do anything more than that. However, if you were to go on to my one about the international power supplies, it's got tremendous information in it. I spent hours and hours researching everything before I put it in, because I was talking about mains voltages, and one of the things that, as a qualified engineer, electronics engineer, you have to be aware of things like safety components and stuff like that. And when you give out information, you have to make sure that it's valid, or you put a proper disclaimer on it, like, for God's sake, don't try this at home, that sort of thing. I didn't do any of that because I researched it, and there's a lot of problems with people not understanding about volts, amps, watts, VA, and all that sort of thing. And there's obviously an overlap with power units and things. It's a very good guide if you've got an amplifier that says it does 2,400 watts, like one of the Mini systems did. Then you look on the back and it says total power consumption 100 watts or whatever it was. You know that the 2500 is a marketing ploy or something. It's certainly not true, because you're only pulling 100 watts. That's all you're going to get is 100 watts. That was that one. The thing about volts and watts, make sure that if you ever buy a piece of equipment from another country, or you're given one from different part of the world in any way, make sure before you plug it in that you've set the voltages right, or that you've got the transformers in, because if you don't, you get the magic smoke and it doesn't work. Smoking is bad for electronics. It doesn't like it. And apart from the fact it might smell nice, there's a high risk of damage and flames and all that sort of thing. You don't want it. And it's such a shame if you've just bought something from America and it's all set up and works lovely and it's a really good piece of kit. The last thing you want to do is plug it in, it go bang. But there we go. Anyway, fastest electronic components. Yes, Kelvin, I wonder that. I always think that you've got to change a fuse once, and although it depends, if you take out the fuse, see the magic fuse there. If the fuse is black and charred, then obviously you've got to look into that seriously and find out why. If, on the other hand, it's just managed to, well, it's just sort of come apart and it's just a bit limp wire, sometimes the wire is just sort of like that, then that's actually an indication that maybe it's just got old. But so you change that one once, and if it blows again, then you find out what's wrong with it. But yeah, I've never understood that. I've had people say to me, "Oh, it can't be anything serious because it just went wrong." I've also had people say, "Oh, it can't be anything serious because it's been going wrong for ages." One's right. Capacitors, electronic components in service to this. Oh yes, I've got the words, big words here. Don't do it. If you go on the forums, and if you go on to things like Facebook, yeah, old fuse. That's right, Kelvin. It is a protection device. It goes for what it goes as well. Old fuses do happen and give up the ghost. Yep. Actually, I'll tell you a story about that. If you were to look on, my Facebook feed, I put a thing on cassette decks. But they were having a go about how expensive the w-1200 was. This is why it's connected. I'm going to talk about a water pump, but they talk about how expensive the w-1200 was at 360 quid, or about $400, I suppose, current exchange rate, which is what it's available for in the UK. If you get it from the right people, you can pay more than if you want to. And I put on a picture of a water pump from a company that I just bought, and it was 350 quid's worth of water pump, 2 brass impellers and a motor, and a tiny little board about that big, which is used to switch thing. It's one of those things that feeds the whole house. And I said, well, how can a cassette deck with all that's involved with it be expensive when a water pump, which is basically two metal blades and a motor, costs the same sort of money? In fact, the list price of that motor pump is 750 quid. And some people were saying, oh, yeah, it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. Why are you putting that on a cassette deck for them? And they obviously didn't understand the comparison I was trying to make, which is, engineering and stuff is expensive. And a water pump, that wasn't an expensive water pump, apparently. Anyway, I had a problem with it. It comes with a 5-year guarantee, and within 2 weeks, it blown a fuse. So I did what I'd said. I changed the fuse, because the first fuse may well have been a problem. And 3 days later, it blew the fuse again. Now, the problem I had was that when this fuse blew, the supply to the bathroom and the WC and everything was all basically disappeared. So I put another fuse in it, and it ran for another couple of days, and then it blew. And at this point, it was getting silly. So I phoned up the company and said, "Look, the first one, it's understandable, but what about the other two?" And they said, "Oh, well, we don't know if there'd been any problem." Oh, you'll like this one. "We don't know if there'd been any problem, but it might well be." And so just change the fuse again and see how you get on. So I put in a slightly bigger fuse. I think it was a two amp fuse, and I put in a 5 amp fuse, and they suggested that, so it was fine. I put that in, and it lasted for a while. But basically, what then happened was the thing stalled, and then blew the fuse. So I phoned them up again and said, "Look, this is really ridiculous." And they said, "Ah, well, have you installed it right? Have you done this, that, and the other?" I said, "Well, it was replacing one of your pumps that was in there for the last 7 years. So I'm assuming that the installation's okay because your previous pump was, good for 7 years." And they said, "Oh, well, we'll send a man round." And this man came round. His name was Simon, I think. And he's trying to tell me that there had to be a head on the water, and there had to be various things. And he stood in my bath. He stood in my bath with the shower head in his hand, holding it up at roughly the height that it would be, saying, "You realise that's only 6 inches of head from the tank." And I said to him, "Don't be silly, you silly man." I said, "For a start, that wouldn't have worked on the last pump for 7 years. And also, the tap's down there. The tap's on the bath, and it's not anywhere near where there's well, it's important where the head is." And I said, "No, don't be silly." And then he started telling me that there was some other things wrong. And then he came down and had a look at the tap, and he's telling me I need a different sort of thing in the bog to operate the water, different sort of stopcock, ballcock in the bog to operate the water, because it wasn't capable of working and all this sort of thing. And he was basically trying to whitewash the place. So I phoned up the company and said, "Why have you sent this man round to try and discredit it?" And they said, "Well, why? What do you mean?" So I explained to them exactly what he'd been doing, because he was their technician, and they apologised profusely and sent me another pump. Put the fuse, put that one in, fired it all up, and it was great, and it lasted for about 10 days, and then it blew the fuse, and then it blew the fuse again, and then so I phoned them up and said, "Is there a problem with these pumps?" "Oh, no, there's definitely no problem with the pumps." Then they phoned me up a couple of days later and said, "We've got a problem with the pumps." They'd had they'd got their seals from a different manufacturer, and they were causing it to seize. So they said, "We will send you another pump, and you can give us the last one that you had back." So I've now actually got 2 pumps worth, if you change the seals, 700 quid each upstairs, plus the one I'm using. And they had back the one that they sent me, which was special, which they wanted back when they sent me the special one. But it just goes to show how these things. And what I actually did was I put in a circuit breaker in place of the fuse, so that when it blows, which it hasn't done on the new one, but when it blows, and just push the button, makes life a bit easier. Let me see, capacitors. That's what I was going to talk about. People talk about recapping electronics. Now, Kelvin will probably vouch for this. Capacitors are weird things. They don't go wrong that often, but when they do, they either dry up or they explode, or various things. They're normally in fault conditions before they actually go wrong, except for the ones that have just been designed badly. And there's a lot of rumours on Facebook about, "Oh, you've bought a cassette deck, you must recap it." I'm just going to say this for anybody who really understands. For God's sake, don't change the capacitors in your cassette deck unless, and this is the important bit, you know that there's something wrong with them. Because if you change every capacitor in a cassette deck, you've got to recalibrate the whole thing. And that's everything, tuned circuits and everything. So if you haven't got a fault, don't fix it. If you have got a fault, capacitors are a good point to start. And anybody who's done any servicing knows what capacitors look like and what the faults are. Capacitors are a strange component because resistors go open circuit, transistors go open circuit, or they go noisy. ICs just stop working. Occasionally they explode, but that's a different sort of IC. Power switching ICs explode. Fuses, as we discussed, can just give up the ghost, or they can blow enormously. I mean, I've seen flames shoot out of fuses. But capacitors, they either dry up, or they leak, or they explode. You don't want to be anywhere near an exploding capacitor. I've seen one that was about the size of a thumb, and it went up, and the mess. It was absolutely. It looked like an explosion in an abattoir. There was bits hanging off all sorts of things. Not good. If you've seen 99 vids, he's done the thing on w-1200 machines, and they have a habit of blowing because they used the can't remember the name of it, but the safety components on the mains filtering, the capacitors on those, which have a habit of they go leaky and they explode. So those tend to just make a bit of a flash, and little bits of capacitor fall off. But if you get an electrolytic that blows, oh boy, it is a disaster. If anybody else is out there and would like to put something on the comments, not on the comments, on the chat. Hello, chat, please. That's not how you spell hello. I've got to change that. That's better. Trying to type, trying to talk, and I can't spell please either. It's a lot. It's a bit like juggling. Right, there's another thing I was going to say on here. My new video, which is going up today, is on erasing tapes. Saw an interesting video. Now I'm not going to be nasty about this one because the chap did what was quite a good job, but he obviously didn't understand what he was doing. It was a channel that doesn't normally do electronics, and for some reason he decided to do a thing about erasing tapes. And if you watch his video, he says about if you've got a line input, you switch the line input to line. He says then, now how many good cassette decks haven't got a line input? Anyway, he had a switch, and he switched the switch to line input. And then he says, and then you go around the back and you unplug the RCA plugs from the line input, so there's nothing there, and then you can use it to erase the tapes. Well, I didn't. It's not wrong. If you do that, it will do that. But why? My wife, who is she's a radio amateur, so she has a little bit of technical knowledge, but she said to me, surely that's not necessary. And I said, yeah, well, I wouldn't have thought so, but who am I to argue? That's why I'm doing a video. Anyway, that's the other thing. Yeah, so that's where people don't really know what they're doing. There's an interesting video on the cassettes. I can't remember what it's about now, but it was quite good. It's had 126,000 views, and it's from a car channel. They obviously did something very right, because it's one of the highest viewing numbers on the channel. Yes, Kelvin, I would agree with that. That is what the erase head is for, and I shall follow that up, I think. Yeah, so this is where people don't know much about things, but actually this one from the car channel is actually quite good. It's Anton Teac, I think, and it's not a bad thing, but it's out of their niche, and it's absolutely taken off, which is strange. Anyway, let's have a look. Is there a fresh subject we can talk about? Yes. The erase head. This is one of the myths about cassette decks. People think that the erase head is there just for fun. I think. You see this thing about the tension mechanisms. That's one of the things that really annoys me. If you look at anything and they'll say, oh, it's the tension mechanism. One of the ways you can tell is by it's got a permanent magnet for the erase head. Even Tecmo said that the other day. And I'd have thought I do know he knows better because he's very good. And I'm not saying anything bad about him. But it can be a bit bad when people start using generalizations like that, because if you look at my video on the boombox, that's a genuine tension mechanism and it's got a proper erase head on it. It's an electromagnetic erase head, and it isn't true to say that that's a way of telling. The way of telling if it's a tension type or a tension, if it's a genuine tension, it's got tension written on it. If it's a tension type, it will look like the one, and it'll have, as Tecmo pointed out, it'll have that spring just above the pinch roller bit, which will give you an idea that it's there. And it only has 2 belts, possibly a counter belt as well. And just because it's that style of deck doesn't mean that it's a bad one. If you saw my video on the it was around about August. My wife bought me it was a digitalizer, one of those sort of Walkman type things, and it was awful. It hummed and buzzed and crackled, and it was the signal to noise ratio actually wasn't signal to noise; it was noise to signal. The noise was actually greater than the signal, which was very disappointing. I had to send it back. But that had the same tension type mechanism in it. But if you take that and you take, I've got a Teac 377, I think it is. That's got a tension mechanism in it, and that specification on that one is absolutely superb. It just happens that it needs a service, but the specification on it is superb. It's got, I think it's 0.03, not 0.3, but 0.03. It might be 0.07 wild flutter. What's wrong with that? So they can be done right. And also the w-1200's got the tension, and so's the the Marantz, which we can't get in the UK. Now I wonder why that is, because Marantz, they're selling the $100 jobby with it's the equivalent of the thing that I've already got the eye on, taped to PC, but it's the modern equivalent of that. But they're not selling it available in the UK. Strange. There's an obvious market for it. It looks nice, and the reports I've had said that it's not bad. I think Westlife's done it. Yeah, well, of course, Kelvin, the thing that we are rewind, that's going to be an interesting thing. That's got basically the tension, the really cheap mechanism in it, as people would say, but apparently it plays okay if you get a good one. I asked them if they'd like me to do a review on one, but they didn't come back. I don't think my channel's big enough, because I need more comments in the comment section. Anyway, yes, that's it. Please put comments in the comment section. Please share. That's the other thing. Share my videos around. Even if people have a laugh at them or a laugh with them, please share. I'm going to start doing live readings of joke books or something if we're not careful. Talk about joke books. No. I did as a point of interest, I did a review on that smartwatch, which has had very, very few people watch it, which is a shame, because it's a lovely watch, and I can't understand why people aren't looking at it. If you can see what's wrong with the thumbnail or the title, then please put it in the comments of that video. Or put it in the comments of this video, because I don't understand. Other people get big results on some of these things, and some people don't, and I don't understand why. Because the thing is, takes a lot of time to do these videos, even that's only a 3-minute, 2.5, 3-minute one. What I intended to do as a point of interest, if in FYI, is my wife's going to use it because she is into sports, and she's going to give me a proper result. And also she happens to be female, which is quite useful for a wife. And the reason I point that out is the R1 Classic has got some female specific monitoring in it, which is useful. And yeah, I'm still using this one, and I'm still referring it to that one. That's amazing. 200 quid, 38 quid. There's some good deals on them at the moment. Actually, the R1 Classic's got £18. That's £18 or about $20 off if you use a voucher at the moment on Amazon. Right, okay. Well, I wouldn't mind, Kelvin. That was very nice of you. Yeah, if you want to, we can sort something out on that. Contact me independently, and we'll sort something out on that. Make sure it all works. And in the meantime, I think at 50 minutes and 57 seconds, 58, 59, 51 minutes. I think we'll call it a day there. Have you got anything to say, Kelvin, before I go? And to anybody who's watching the replay, thank you very much. Please put in comments down below. It all helps, and I'd like to try and get the channel to actually fly. It's had a little bit of a stumble over Christmas, so I want to get it to work, because it should be useful, and it keeps me off the streets. I'm actually one of the few people who does stuff on YouTube that was actually there when the equipment came out. Okay, Kelvin. So I shall catch you another time. And anyway, to all anybody who's watching, thank you very much. And I will be doing another one of these next week, and I'll see if I can find something else to talk about. But thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for watching the replay. And yeah, comments in the comments below. Let's try and get these to fly. I will, and this is a promise, answer any proper questions and get back to you personally. Thank you very much. Good night, Kelvin. Bye-bye.